So Visualforce. First of all, let's understand what is Visualforce. Visualforce is a framework that allows developers to build sophisticated custom user interfaces. So this is a framework which will allow you to build sophisticated custom user interfaces. Remember that Salesforce has given you standard interfaces, right? You already have the page layouts, you have your home page, and there are a lot of other user interfaces that you use in Salesforce, correct? In addition to the ones which have been already given to you by Salesforce, in case you want to build more user interfaces, then you can use Visualforce for that, right? And these interfaces can be hosted natively on the force.com platform. Now, what is this concept? See, whenever you are building a user interface which needs to be displayed, which needs to be accessible on the internet, it needs to be hosted on some platform, right? Hosted on a platform or a server, right? So that it can be available on the internet. All these websites that you see on the internet, they need to be hosted. Just designing a website, for example, if you just go and design a website, that will not make the website available on the internet. Okay, that will not make it available on the web. It needs to be hosted somewhere, right? So it needs to be hosted on a server or somewhere, so that it becomes available on the web, and then people typing a certain address can access that web page, correct? That's the logic, that's how it works. Now, this Visualforce pages which you design, these are natively hosted on the force.com platform. Got it? So the force.com platform is the Salesforce platform, right? So these are hosted on force.com platform. Now this Visualforce framework, now what does this Visualforce framework include? It includes a tag-based markup language similar to HTML. Okay. So this Visualforce framework would include a tag-based markup language which is very similar to HTML. HTML is hypertext markup language. Visualforce also has a tag-based markup language. So there are tags for everything. Basically, what we are trying to do, we are trying to design an interface, right? So in that interface, you will need several things. Sometimes you will need to design a section. Sometimes you might need a header. Sometimes you might need a table, image. So for everything, there is a tag here. It's pretty similar to HTML, right? So that's what Visualforce is. Simple language. It's a markup language which can be used for designing the user interfaces which can be hosted on force.com platform. Okay, so you cannot use Visualforce for designing any web page. You can just design pages for Salesforce, because these pages can be natively hosted on force.com platform. It can only be used in force.com platform. Fine. So that's what Visualforce is. Now, before we start working with Visualforce and before you start creating your user interfaces or pages using Visualforce, you need to enable the Visualforce development mode. So you have to go to your developer org and you have to enable the Visualforce development mode on that org. Okay. How do you do that? Development mode embeds a Visualforce page editor in your browser. Okay, so what exactly Visualforce development mode will do? It will embed a Visualforce page editor in your browser. Okay, so when you enable this development mode, you get a page editor in the browser itself. Alright, so what is the advantage of getting the page editor in the browser? You'll be able to edit the page while looking at the page. So you will be able to quickly figure out what changes you are making. So when you make some changes in the code and you save it, and because the editor is on the page itself, on the browser itself, you can quickly look at the outcome of the code that you have changed. All right. So that's the thing. Development mode embeds a Visualforce page editor in your browser that allows you to see code and preview the page at the same time. So this editor will actually help you see the code and preview the page both at the same time. So if you're making any small changes in the code, and if that is affecting any changes on the Visualforce page, you will be able to see that, correct, at the same time. So that's the advantage. Okay. So first thing that you have to do is, before you start creating Visualforce pages, you have to go and enable the development mode. How do you do that? To enable the development mode, all that you have to do is, you just have to go to My Settings, Personal, Advanced User Details, and then you have to click Edit, and then you have to go and click on the select the Development Mode checkbox, and then click Save. So this is the what you have to do. So let me just log in and show it to you. How do you enable the development mode? Okay. So to enable the development mode, all that you have to do is, as I said, you have to go to My Settings. Where do you go to My Settings? You click on your name, then go to My Settings. Under My Settings, you can go to Personal, then you can go to Advanced User Details, and then you can click on Edit. Scroll down a little, you will see something called Development Mode here. You see this? You have to check the checkbox. That's it. Your development mode is on now. It's a one-time setting, so you don't have to do it every time you're creating a page. You just need to do it once. So I've enabled it. Now we are ready to start creating our Visualforce page. Okay. Um, just a small thing. Can we create page without enabling development mode? The answer is yes. Okay. Is enabling development mode a must before I can create a Visualforce page? No. You can create a page even without enabling the development mode. But then what will happen? Then you will not have this page editor which we are talking about. Okay, so what exactly this development mode is doing? It embeds the Visualforce page editor, which uh, actually allows you to see the code and preview the page both at the same time, right? So that is the advantage of development mode. But you will still be able to create a Visualforce page without enabling development mode. Right? So it's not a must, but it's a good thing to enable the development mode so that you can quickly preview the pages and edit the code accordingly, right? So now development mode is on. Let's start creating a Visualforce page. How do you create a Visualforce page? It's very, very simple. You just have to go to your browser and you have to add slash apex slash hello to the URL after salesforce.com. Okay. So for example, if your Salesforce instance is this, the new URL should be this slash apex slash hello. Hello is the page name. Alright, let me do it and show it to you. So you want to create a page, all that you have to do is come to the browser, go to the URL, just delete everything after salesforce.com. Okay, then put a slash, type apex, put a slash, and then give the page name. Okay, page 1, whatever page name you want to give. Use that page name here. Okay, so just go to the URL, delete everything after salesforce.com slash, then type apex, then give the page name. That's it, and press enter. Fine. This will throw an error. It will say page does not exist. It says page does not exist. But just below that, it will give you an option to create that page. Page 1 does not exist as of now. But what you can do is you have the option of creating it. So all that you can do is click on this link and create the page. Now this page is created. Okay, and this is the location for this page. After salesforce.com, put a slash, then type apex slash page 1, right? So your page is ready. Open this page, code. This is the code editor. I was talking about the code editor, correct? Here is the code editor. This is the code for this page, and this is the output of this page. So Visualforce has created a page for you which says congratulations, this is your new page. So this is the content of the page as of now. Now you can just keep on adding content into it, or you can just uh, remove whatever you see here, and if you want to add something else and all that. Correct. And whatever you have to change has to be done from the code, like instead of congratulations. So now let's look into this. So whatever you see here is actually written in the code. Congratulations. Okay. So instead of congratulations, let me make it hello. Okay. Once you change the code, click on the save button. Save the code. I want to put a line break after hello. I want to make this italic. This is your new page. This is in italics. Got it? You want to delete everything? Just go ahead and delete. It becomes a blank page. Want to write it again? Paste it. Fine. So all that you have to do is just keep on making changes here. Now this new page will be controlled from by this code that you write here, right? So the page that you have created, page 1, this is the output of the page, this is the code for the page. You see the code in the code editor. Okay, very simple. You just have to control things from here. What do you want to display? How do you want to display on the page in the code, and that gets displayed here. Correct? Right. So this is one way of creating the page, the one that we did. Just we went to the URL, deleted everything after salesforce.com, then put a slash apex slash page name, and the page got created. Now, there's an alternate way of creating the page. This is one way. You have one more alternate way for creating a Visualforce page. How do you do that? You just need to go to setup, develop pages, click on new, and then just create, click on create and label the page, and then click save. Okay, so from the setup menu also you have an option. This time we have created the page from the URL, right? Under setup develop pages also you have an option of creating the page. Let's see what is the alternate way of creating a Visualforce page. You can go to setup, develop pages, Visualforce pages. Here it is. Setup, develop Visualforce pages, and you can click on new. See, the one that you created, that's also listed here. Page 1 is what we created, that also got listed here. You can create a new one. Put a label and name for this. And here is the code. You can type in the code and save it. Okay. Usually we don't use this approach because the problem with this approach is you're not able to see the output. Now, even if I make some changes here, I will not be able to see it. Okay, I just have to type in the code. So that is the reason why we usually don't prefer this approach of creating the page. Right. But this will also help you create a page. Page 2 got created. Now how will you access this page 2? Again, the link is same, apex slash page 2. Here it is. Right. So there are two ways of creating the Visualforce pages. Most of the times you will be using this URL approach for creating the page. Right. That's the best way for creating a page for a developer because they are able to see the code, edit the code then and there itself. Okay. Okay, now let's understand the pages. We know how to create the page. The page has been created. Now let's understand what all components or what all elements do we have in the page. A page definition consists of two primary elements. One is Visualforce markups. Okay, so your page definition, the page will basically have two primary elements. One is markup. Okay, Okay, what is a markup? The Visualforce markup. The markup defines the user interface components that should be included on the page and the way they should appear. Okay, so what's a markup? Markup is basically the user interface component that should appear on the page and the way they should appear on the page. Got it? So any text, image, link, button, table of data, header, footer, these things are markup. The things they which should appear on the page and the way they should appear on the page. For example, if I am actually displaying a text on the page, so whether the text should be bold or italic or what should be the font, what should be the font family, what should be the size. Okay, if you are trying to display a logo, you want to display a big logo, small logo. So the components which will be displayed on the page, all those things are markups. Okay. Anything that is displayed on the page is markup, and using markup you also control the way they should appear on the page. Correct. So the markup defines the user interface components that should be included on the page and the way they should appear. Alright. The other element is controller. So first element is definitely the markup, the components which you see on the page and the way they appear on the page. Second is Visualforce controller. Now what is controller? Controller is something which you don't see on the page, but that actually controls the behavior of everything on the page. Yeah. Right. So for example, just think about any user interface that you use, that you actually go to and use it. For example, think of Gmail. Okay. Gmail has its user interface. You see several components on the page, right? Inbox, sent emails. Then there's a compose button, send button, delete button. So these buttons are there, right? So these are all markups on that page. But there is a lot of logic also written that what will happen when you click on a delete button, what will happen when you click on a send button, what will happen when you click on a compose button, right? That's all controller. That's all controlling logic, right? So things which you don't see on the page, but they actually control the entire behavior of the page. What will happen when when someone loads the page? What will happen when the page gets refreshed? What will happen when someone clicks on a button? So all those logics are written in the controller, correct? So Visual Force controllers is a set of instructions that specify what happens when a user interacts with the components specified in associated Visualforce markup, such as when a user clicks a button or link. So when a user clicks on a button or link, what happens? That's what your controller is. Okay. Controller will hold all the logic. Markup will have all the user interface components which are to be displayed on the page. Okay. One more thing that you need to understand, the controllers also provide access to the data that should be displayed on the page. So what data will be displayed on the page, that is also controlled using the controller logic. Correct? So if you open a page, in that page, whether you will have all the information related to that record or you will have some other information, or you know do you would you get to see all the accounts from a city, or will you get to see all the accounts from a certain country? That also depends on the controller. So controller gives you the ability to control the um, data access on the page also, which all data will come into the page and which all data will be displayed on the page. Correct. That's about the controller part. Fine. So two primary elements are there on the Visualforce page. One is the markup, things that you see on the page, controller, which basically uh, has the logics written inside it, right? And not only in Visualforce page, for most of the pages that you access, on the internet, most of the pages have um, what do you call it, a markup part and a controller part. Correct? The things that you see on the page and the logics which are written. Most of the pages will have some sort of code, some sort of logic written behind that, okay, which controls the behaviors of the buttons and the page loads and the refreshes, everything. Okay. So in Visualforce also we do have markups and controllers. Okay. So I'll talk about the controllers a little later. Before that, let's understand the markups a little more. Okay. Okay, sorry, markups. Right. So when we are talking about markup, there is one more concept that we have to understand, which is called a component and attribute. Okay, so there are two things which we need to understand. One is component, one is attribute. What is a component? Component is whatever component you want to display on the Visualforce page. Okay, so for everything there is a component, a Visualforce component available, and you can call that component to be displayed on the Visualforce page, right? Like if you want to display an image, a form, a table, right? A small section on the page. For everything, Visualforce gives you a component, right? Like if you come to this page, the one that we created, in this page, this is a component, Apex page component, right? So Visualforce has several components available which you can use for designing your page, okay? And these components will start with Apex colon, right? There are a lot of components listed and they start with Apex colon. Right? Out of all these components, Apex page component is basically the most common component, and all Visualforce pages should start with this component and should end with this component. So this is the start of the component, this is the end of the component. Whatever you want to put in the page should be put within these two components. Okay, within this component basically, start and end of this component. Okay, so every page that you create, every Visualforce page should have this Apex page at the start, Apex page at the bottom, right? After, within this, whatever you want to design, you can design, but never ever delete this part. Okay, so this has to be there. Similarly, there are a lot of other components. Okay, so if you come here, you start, see, there are so many of them. So whatever component you want to display on the page, you can actually use that component. Got it? So it can be a checkbox, it can be a button, it can be a link, it can be a table. For everything we have a component. So if you want to show a checkbox, you have a component. If you want to show an input box, there is a component. If you want to show a button, there is a component for that, right? So then again, as I said, table and all those things, we have components for these things listed. But out of all of the components, Apex page is something which has to be used in every page. The page has to start with Apex page component and it has to end with Apex page. Whatever you want to design should be designed within this Apex page component. Right? Now, what do we do next? The next is attribute. Every component has certain attributes. We have seen that we have components available there, right? And you can use the components to design your page the way you want. Right? Every component has some attributes. Okay. So what does an attribute do? The attribute basically controls the behavior of the component. Okay. For example, Apex page is a component. It has an attribute called sidebar. Okay, there's an attribute called sidebar. Now, what will that attribute do? That attribute sidebar will help you control whether you want to display the sidebar on the page or not. Currently the sidebar is being displayed, right? This is sidebar. So there is a sidebar attribute on the page component which allows you to control whether you want to see the sidebar on the page or not. So by default it is visible, and your attribute needs to be written on the start of the component. Okay. So sidebar. See, there is a sidebar component. You have the option of making it true or false. By default it's true. By default it's visible. You can make it false. Save it. See, no sidebar. Page is same. The sidebar is not here. Okay. The same way there is another attribute for this component which is called show header. Okay. By default the header is shown. This is the header part. I don't want to see the header, so I can just go and say show header equals false. Get it? So these attributes can actually control how your component is going to be displayed on the page. Right? So we saw just the examples with Apex page component. So this page component has sidebar, show header, a lot of other attributes. Fine. So these can be used for enhancing your page. These attributes, the way you want to display things on your page. Right? And every component has a few attributes. I've deleted everything. By default sidebar and header are true, so they will again be displayed if I save the code. Fine. And now if you see, again it is displayed. So primarily, for the markup you will be working with the components and attributes, right? You'll have to call the components, and for the components you have the attributes. Some attributes are mandatory attributes or required attributes, so you always have to give a value for them. Some are optional, like for Apex page component all the attributes are optional, so none of them is required, so you are still able to use a component without using any of the attribute here. For some components, as we keep on doing more examples, you will see for some components some of the attributes are mandatory, so you always have to supply a value for them. Okay, so that is there. Okay, now, so ideally, you should start creating a page like this. Just go to URL and then create whatever you want. Put the page name. The page gets created. Okay, and then you can go ahead and delete this part of the code. Okay, just leave the Apex page component and then start designing the page the way you want. Let's say. I want to put paragraph break here. Here. Okay, so whatever you want to design on the page, right? Uh, there's one more component which is called a page block. This page block component, if you use it, see again this page block has got started and it eliminates here itself. What does this page block component do? It brings in this particular block in the page. You see this small block? Okay, now if you put this particular text inside the page block, okay, now let me save. There, so that text has come inside the block. Okay, so this page block is another component which you can use uh, basically to create a rectangular block in the page. Right. Now in the page block there is an attribute called title. There is an attribute called title and you can put a title here. Click on save. See, it has taken the title for the page block. Got it. So this way there are a lot of other components which you can actually work with, like the page block, then there is page block section, and the other components are also available. So if you are using any of these components like page block, and if you put text inside it, then what will happen? The page block gets extended to accommodate this entire text. You got it? So that's how it is. Now you just have to, all that you have to do is you just have to use your components where you need this, need the component. Just keep on calling the components and the attributes, and use it for displaying the data or anything else the way you want. Right. So that's about our components and attributes. Right. Now, component and attribute is fine. Markup is fine. But your page will be static till the time you don't put a controller into it. Okay, your page will be a static page until and unless you static page, and it cannot have access to the data till the time you do not use a controller. Okay, so far we do not have a controller on this page, it's all markup. So in this case, if you don't use a controller, one, you cannot add logics into the page, that what will happen when this happens and what will happen when that happens, so that thing will not come. And you cannot also bring in the data onto the page. Why are we creating the pages? We are actually creating the pages to display data, right? When you are creating a Visualforce page, you're basically creating it for to view the data in a different format, or maybe in a different uh, way, or with a different filter. Okay. Now, if the data does not come here, the page doesn't make any sense to you. What will you do looking into this kind of static letters, static text? Okay, we need the Visualforce page to display data. To bring in the data, you need a controller, because controller will control. If you see that, if you remember, I was just talking about controller, that here controllers also provide access to the data that should be displayed in a page and can modify component behavior. Okay, so the data that will be displayed on the Visualforce page, that also depends on your Visualforce page. Sorry, that also depends on a controller. The data which will be displayed on the Visualforce page, that also depends on the controller. Okay, so before we start getting the data on the Visualforce page, we'll have to understand the controller concept also. Okay. So there are four different types of controller. As I said earlier, that controller is basically the set of controlling logics which basically controls what will be displayed on the Visualforce page. Okay, what data, what logics. Okay, so the controller is basically responsible for controlling what data comes on the page, and this it's also responsible for controlling the behaviors. Somewhere if you have created a button or something, what will happen when someone clicks on the button, that will also be controlled by the controller. So there are four different types of controllers that we work with. Okay. The first one is standard controller. What is a standard controller? A standard controller consists of the same functionality and logic that is used for a standard Salesforce page. So all that you have to understand is Salesforce already has a lot of pages, right? And they must be having certain controllers which are controlling the logics and functionalities of those pages. When Salesforce standard pages are there, there must be some standard controllers which they have written Controller is what? It's pure set of logic, some logic, right? Some program, some instruction, some logic which is written. So when Salesforce has its own set of standard pages, for those pages, Salesforce must have written some logic, some controllers, some existing set of instructions. Okay, those are called standard controllers. Now Salesforce gives you the option to use the standard controller on your Visualforce pages. So what will happen? What will be the advantage? You will be able to use those controllers easily. You just have to call the controller. You don't have to write any logic, right? But the only challenge with the standard controller is it's the same functionality and logic that is used by standard pages. Okay, you don't get any additional functionalities. Okay, so there's one advantage with the standard controller, which is that it's easy to use. All that you have to do is you just have to call the controller, and the controller is ready, right? So it's a ready-made solution for you. But it will give you the same set of functionalities which Salesforce standard pages use. Second is standard list controller. Standard list controller is very very similar to the standard controller. The only difference is standard controller is used for a single record page and this is used for a list page. Okay. A standard list controller enables you to create visual force pages that can display or act as a set of records. So standard controller will allow you to create a visual force page for a single record, whereas standard list controller will allow you to create a visual force page for multiple records. But in both the cases, you are using the Salesforce standard logics, okay? And you are not writing the logic. So you can easily use them, but you will not get any additional functionalities and logics. In case you want to use your additional functionalities and logics, then what do you need? Then you need a custom controller. Okay, a custom controller is a class written in Apex. Now this is where you are allowed to write the logics. To write the logic, you will need Apex programming language. So this is something which we'll come to a little later, but just want you to understand the concept. So a custom controller is where you will write the logics using Apex. Okay, that implements all of a page's logic without leveraging a standard controller. So this custom controller will be able to execute custom logics which are written by you, okay, and it will not leverage the standard controller. If you use a custom controller, you can define new navigation elements or behaviors. So if you're using a custom controller, then it's completely up to you how do you want to control the page and navigation behavior. Okay. So for example, for a standard controller, when you try when you use the function save, just giving a small example. The save function by default saves the record. Okay, so if you are using a standard or a standard list controller, your save is always going to save the record. But for example, you just want to write a logic of your own. At the moment I click on save, the record should get saved and an email should be sent automatically, and the other record should get updated. That's the three things you want to do on just one click. For that kind of a functionality, you need to write the logic on your own because by default, save means save. It's just going to save the record, right? So if you need functionalities beyond the standard functionalities which are given, then you will have to write those functionalities and you will do so using custom controller. So that's the third type of controller. So this custom controller basically allows you to write the programs or functionalities. Only thing is that you have to write it. You are not getting anything ready-made. And then there is controller extension. A controller extension is again a class which is written in Apex that adds to or overrides behavior in a standard or custom controller. So an extension is basically again a program, Apex program, a class which is written in Apex. This controller extension can actually extend the functionalities of a controller, right? So this is used for extending or adding to the functionalities of a controller. So if you are using a standard or a standard list or a custom and you want to add a few more functionalities, you can use a controller extension. Clear? So these are different types of controllers. So for now, you just need to understand out of four, you just understand two: standard and custom. Standard is where you are just able to use the Salesforce default functionality. Custom is where you have to write the functionalities. You have to write the instructions, right? So custom is a little time consuming to use because you'll have to write the instructions. But here you will have that advantage that you can write your own logics, which you cannot do in the standard. Fine. So we will talk about each of these controllers one by one. But once we meet tomorrow, we will start creating pages with the standard controller. Right. So if you are not very clear on all these types of controller, don't worry at all. It's just to give you an overview. We are going to talk about each controller in details with examples. All right. So just don't be worried. Okay. So that's it for today.